Hi folks, in today's video we're going to be doing a very quick tutorial on how to weather with some pigments. Now normally I'll say go grab yourselves a nice hot drink or maybe a nice cold beer, but really in this tutorial there's probably not going to be enough time. But anyway, we're going to be using Green Stuff World's pigments that was kindly sent to me out for review. First of all, we're placing some pigment fixer into a pop bottle lid, and we're going to be using this for sealing in the pigments and for also streaking of the pigments. Now I'm adding some pigment to the lid of the bottle, and as you can see it's a very dark green colour, and we're going to be looking for the consistency of moss. So as I refocus the camera here, you'll see that I've got a brush that's dry at the moment, and I'm just going to start applying the pigments dry to the model. Now I'm looking for mainly at this particular time the panel line on the center part of his leg there, where I think some moss might actually start building up naturally. And I'm just working away with the pigments here, just adding them onto the model. You can also wet the tip, or dampen I should say, the tip of the brush in the pigment fixer, and then dip the brush in the pigment and add it that way. But here I'm just adding more of the pigment. The brush is a little damp at the moment, and I'm just going to start pulling some streaks down that I've added with the pigment fixer. Now the trick here is to not make the brush too wet. If the brush is too wet, you'll start getting puddles of the pigment run down the surface of the model. So you'll see me from time to time keep wiping the bristles of the brush on the very filthy cutting mat. But yeah, I'm just slowly packing in those pigments. Now I'm going to switch over to the lighter colour green pigment, which I believe is called Moss Green from Green Stuff World there, and I'm just slowly applying this over the top just to add more texture, more colour, and just to add a little bit more believability to the miniature. This is a Gunpla model, guys, and you might see a new logo on my video. Now it's been a very long time since I've worked on a Gunpla kit, guys, but I get all my Gunpla kits from Hobby Frontline. Wonderful guys there over at Hobby Frontline, so I'll put a link in the description box down below to their web store, where you can check out all the Gunpla kits that they do on their channel. But anyway, just slowly packing in more pigments. The best way I can describe adding pigments to the miniature for the best effect possible is to do it very, very tiny amounts at a time. You don't want to load up your brush full of loads of pigment and just smash it onto the model. The key to getting effects correct, which I'm no master of, is to try and get them to look in scale. So you want the streaks to be quite small, you want the pigments and the texture to be quite small as well. But here you can see I'm following the panel line again, and I'll probably pull some streaks down from here in a minute maybe. I might do, I might not, I can't remember on this one. But again, just slowly does it, just add the pigment slowly. This is so fun to do, guys, adding weathering to your miniatures, in particular obviously on this Gunpla kit here. And we're still working with that light green pigment. Apologies for the snoring in the background. It's obviously way past Jax's bedtime. What time is it? About 7 o'clock on the evening. And yeah, he's snoring away in the background, so apologies for that. Just adding some pigments here, as you can see, towards the bottom of the feet, and we're just going to stump some streaks out with the brush there. But this is really simple stuff to do, guys. Now the reason I'm using pigment fixer and not like a water or an odorless thinner or something like that is the pigment fixer will seal the pigments in on the model. Now, if you was to very vigorously rub against the model, you probably would reactivate the pigments on the surface and maybe get a little on your fingers, possibly. But if someone's manhandling your miniatures roughly, then, you know, as the saying goes, they deserve a poke in the eye with a sharp object. So yeah, I don't think it's really a worry, but that's why we're using Pigment Fixer, to seal in the pigments as we're actually working with them. But in a moment, I think I'll switch over from the moss pigment colours, and then we're going to do a little bit of rust on the vernier of the gunpla kit there, or the exhaust funnel, whatever you want to call it, and we'll do a little bit of rust pigment work. But as I say, guys, I mean, this tutorial is only going to go on for 10 minutes, and this is all filmed live, so you can see how quickly the effect actually builds up on the miniature. It doesn't take long to do these effects at all, but you know, you can get some really great results. What you'll find is once the pigments have dried on the surface of the miniature, that the actual effect will look even better. What I'll do is, after I've finished adding all the moss effect and rust to the exhaust funnel, I'll dry the pigments off with a hairdryer, and we'll come back and we'll see what it looks like. Just adding a few tiny amounts of pigment there, as you can see, tiny little dots, just to make it look less sort of, you know, even and a little bit more rough. Just stumping some more lines down there, getting some more streaks, some moss streaks there, looking nice. Now we're going to start using the rust. So here I think I've got my brush a little bit dampened. I have with the pigment fixer, and I'm just working all around the exhaust funnel there with the pigment. And what we'll do in a moment is we'll actually add some of the lighter pigment to the exhaust funnel, and the two different colors. I mean, you don't need that many. I mean, the more you add, like you could add some yellow ochre pigment as well in there as well, some really light colors to break it up. But even just a couple of pigment colors there will look really nice. And the cool thing with pigments is once they dry ultra matte. And if you've ever looked at rust on a vehicle or on metal or anything like that, it does look ultra matte. So the finish and the texture of the actual pigments look very realistic. As they're wet at the moment, you can't see, but you'll tell in a moment when I come back, and you'll see it all dry on the surface of the miniature. I'm just adding some pigment fixer to the top surface there and underneath of the exhaust, and that's going to seal the pigments in nicely. And we're just adding some pigment here. Here it's really thin, so I've got the brush quite wet with fixer here, so it's almost created like a rust wash with the pigment. And we're just adding just small amounts of rust there where we think some rust might be on the actual gunpla kit there. It's nice to actually formulate like a little bit of narrative on the actual thing, like tell a story with the weathering, where you think the weathering should be. Also, Google is your best friend, guys. You know, do Google search for moss effects and rust. I actually was looking at some of the derelict cars from the game The Last of Us. Wonderful game, one of the best games ever made in my personal opinion. And some of the mossy looking textures of the cars and the environments there really helped me formulate what I think it would look like on this gunpla kit. But here you can see what it looks like after the moss effect and the rust had thoroughly dried on the surface after blasting it with a hairdryer for a moment or two there. And as you can see, it gives a fairly authentic finish. And here you can see what we did previously off camera on the other leg there. I think it's more cartoony on the one that we just done because I spent a little longer without a camera in my face stumping the pigments out, but either way I think the effect looks nice. But you guys let me know what you think in the comments field down below. I want to thank Green Stuff World for the pigments, really appreciate it. Also want to say a huge thank you to Hobby Frontline, who are a superb supplier of Gunpla kits. And lastly, thank you very much for taking your time out of the day to watch this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.